Alright, how about I don't attack you for 3 turns, and I'll destroy that rule of law, slowing you down. Is that enough? Sir, this is a Wendy's. You need to pay money for food. I have no idea what you're talking about. Making deals is an important part of life. Negotiating salaries, buying a rug in the bazaars of Istanbul, or scoring a good deal at a fast food joint. It's a good skill to learn. And as someone who has done all of those things, I wanted to make a guide about making deals in Commander. Politics in EDH is part of what makes the format special. It's also one of the best ways to improve your win rate, especially on a budget, since you don't need to actually upgrade your deck to make better deals. It's what separates the good casual players from great ones, in my opinion. Before I get into it, if you're looking to pick up some politics cards that I talk about in this video, consider buying them from Cool Stuff Inc. and using code TTM at checkout to get a discount. Plus, it supports the channel. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the video. In casual EDH, with multiple players, there is a lot of room to make deals, since not all players are on equal footing. Teaming up to slow down a player who's in the lead is not at all uncommon, and is probably the most common deal making you see in Commander. But you can use deals for more than just slowing down the arch enemy. You can use deals to gain virtual card advantage, to break the color pie, and get out of normally unwinnable situations. I sometimes like to think of deals as drawing cards. If you make a deal asking someone to remove a silent arbiter in exchange for not attacking them for 2 turns, that's basically like drawing and casting a Doomblade for free. And your opponent who cast the removal spell drew 2 free fog effects. Depending on how good the deals are, the value could potentially be limitless. By making these deals, you can get around color pie restrictions as well. In certain colors, especially monocolored decks, you might struggle to get past certain things. Like an indestructible creature could be tricky for a mono green deck, or enchantments for mono black and mono red. You might have 1 or 2 options in your deck, but instead of waiting to draw those, you could try and make a deal. Your opponent might have a disenchanted hand, and you might have a terminate. A deal here could benefit both of you. Simply talking to your opponents could be a great way to get started. And politics gets more important the worse a game is for you. Sometimes players look at the table and it feels like one person is so far ahead that you've already lost. But remember, you got friends at the table. Instead of attacking each other, make a deal to pressure the archenemy. This is why politics is so powerful. It's part of the self-regulating nature of the format. So even though one deck might be stronger than the other 3 at the table, they can work together to overcome that. So how do you go about making these deals? You need to think about what your opponent wants, since what you need is not always what they need. Sometimes it's rather obvious, like your opponent wants you to attack someone else with your big scary creature, and sometimes it's less obvious. Does that collector oof actually slow your opponent down that much? They might have a few mana rocks in play, but it doesn't mean they have a lot of artifacts they care about in their hand. And sometimes your opponent doesn't know what they want yet. This is a pretty common issue, especially with new players that don't realize how scary certain cards are. This is very common for combo pieces. Nim Deathmantle, for example, does not look like a super scary card by itself. I mean, you can get some decent value from it, but it's a bit slow. Nim Deathmantle, though, is often used as a combo piece, so the level of urgency from seeing one could vary from player to player, whether or not they know that. Being vocal and asking what people are able to do if the other combo piece comes down is a good way to get the conversation started. Once players realize they need to get something off the table, deals are a lot easier to get going. Here are some other tips when making deals. Avoid using language that is tied to the game. So saying, "Hey, if I don't attack you, don't destroy my commander next turn," is not a great idea. Destroy is a specific word, and some players may interpret this as Sunfall is okay to cast with this deal. Destroy, exile, return to hand, phase out are all words that mean stuff. Even some other common terms like bounce can be used instead of return to hand, so I would avoid using all of those. Saying something like, "If I don't attack you, you won't remove my commander next turn," is a great way to cover most everything your opponent could do. But honestly, that doesn't even cover pacifism effects. You could say remove, mess with, or affect negatively my commander if you really want to get specific. Try to keep your deals simple as well. Make it clear when and where the deal ends. Don't leave things open-ended by promising not to attack or mess with them for an unspecified amount of time. Keep it short, simple, and quantitative, like you won't attack this turn or won't remove their commander until your next turn. Now this also means you need to be very careful when you accept a deal because of the words they use. If someone says they won't destroy your commander this turn, that's pretty weak. They could just pass turn and cast a Doomblade, or exile your commander on the same turn. If someone tries to offer a vague deal like this, try and clarify with them. You should always know what you're getting into before agreeing to anything, and that's true for life in general. Sorry, you wanted me to sign here? Okay, sure. What was this for again? The next suggestion is gonna sound counterintuitive in terms of this video, but you should turn down most deals. Saying no to a deal is oftentimes the most powerful thing you can do. Here's an example. Your opponent says, hey, I have removal in hand. If you swing at me, I'll exile your creature. Initially, it might seem tempting to just swing at someone else and dodge the removal, but instead, take note of the board. Are you the only threat on the table? If so, not swinging at that player means they're not getting pressured at all. And then what happens next turn? They're gonna offer you the same thing. Don't attack, I won't remove it. This is a trap players fall for all the time, especially if you're the one putting out pressure first, because it's not like they're going to use the removal on someone else. Letting one piece of removal get dangled over your head turn after turn is really detrimental. One of the best things you can do here is call their bluff. Attack them. This either forces them to use the removal, giving you space to play another threat or your commander without being as worried about them removing it, or they might realize that you have something more threatening in hand and just not cast the removal and take the damage. Remember, with deals, your opponent is always going to get more out of it than they let on. Yes, removing that Stony Silence might let your mana rocks be free, but they likely have something in hand you don't know about, which they need the Stony Silence gone before they can play the card. So keep that in mind. Of course, your opponent also does not know what you have in hand. Maybe you get just as much value or more value removing the piece than they do. I'm just saying your opponents don't always have your best interest in mind, and to be wary of that. Politics being used to balance out the table is also pretty great. I think it's awesome to talk to other players, enact a truce of some sort, and focus down one player before going back to the free-for-all. I feel like power imbalances often occur when everyone plays solitaire and ramps and draws and plays value engines by themselves. And if they don't interact, then the strongest deck will just ramp and draw more than everyone else and win the game. Taking a more proactive approach to politics can help avoid that. Politics can also be used if you're playing a salty archetype. I had some comments on my previous Salt video talking about how they're new and they want to play Infect because they think Phyrexians are cool, but they get focused down by the table, since the table is scared of Infect, which is reasonable. So you might need some politics to help you get around this. Personally, I'm less likely to use removal on the Infect player if they make a deal with me. If you are playing Mill, Infect, or something else that gets focused down by your playgroup, try to wheel and deal more so you can rush down the strongest player late game and hopefully get the other two players off your back early game. Mileage may vary from playgroup to playgroup, and it does depend on your deck. If your Infect deck is very strong and very tuned, you might not be able to politics very well, and could end up as the archenemy anyway. Part of what I think makes EDH really fun is the social aspect. The fact that it is a 4-player free-for-all makes it so fun to make deals and work together. It shifts the dynamic throughout the game and makes games really interesting. This makes every card potentially function differently than they do in 1v1 Magic, because you can tack on an infinite number of extra abilities by making deals. Making deals is something you will get better at the more you do it. It takes practice, especially if you're playing against random players, since you don't know what they're like. Reading the room and table to see where you can make deals is a skill that will just take a while to get good at. There is also a fine line between making clutch deals and constantly yapping, so be sure to only use deals when they seem most crucial. You don't need to try and politics every time you swing in with a 2-2. I want to finish off by listing some cards that are much better when you make deals, beyond the obvious with the voting cards. Those are great for politics decks and making deals, but I assume everybody already knows that. Null Chamber is an incredibly powerful card if you can get one other player on board. It lets you and one opponent of your choosing name a card. Those cards can't be cast. Playing this randomly could backfire, since in theory they could name your commander and you just shut down your own deck. But if you can get one player to agree and name something that doesn't hurt you, this is essentially 2 copies of Nevermore for 4 mana. Usually I can find someone willing to name either the commander of the player in the lead, or get some non-blue deck to name Cyclonic Rift. Oftentimes, you can get the player who's fallen behind most to team up with you. The Hunted Cycle is a set of creatures that have above average stats for their cost, but the downside of giving your opponents some creatures. But what if those tokens were goated? Well, they can be. With a card like Hunted Horror, for example, if you can get someone to agree to use those centaurs at someone else, it means you're putting a ton of power on board for just 2 mana. All of which won't be coming your way, assuming they agreed. Usually it means you need to make a deal to not attack that player with the hunted creature, but since you want to focus down to the slowest, grindiest control deck anyway, you can usually find someone else who has a more aggressive deck that is willing to do the same. Scheming Symmetry is another super neat politics card that can easily be more powerful than a normal Imperial Seal, if you can make a deal. Top deck tutors are strong but have the downside of being card disadvantage, and not getting you the card right then and there. This is why the sorcery speed versions are quite a bit worse than the instant speed ones. But let's say one player has a massive board, and the rest of the table would benefit from a board wipe. Scheming Symmetry can do work here. If you find someone willing to cast a board wipe, they draw next turn, you can have the Symmetry let them search for the board wipe, and then you can search for whatever you want, and just set yourself up to have a great turn post board wipe. And with this card, you don't need to pick yourself, so in theory you could have 2 other players dig for removal and you just do nothing. Last card I want to talk about is Guided Passage. It has the funny feature of simply revealing your whole deck, so everybody gets to see your list, but it also gives you 3 cards of an opponent's choosing: a land, a creature, and a non-land non-creature. If you make a pact with a player, this can easily be 3 demonic tutors, letting you find a ghost quarter to remove a coffers, a board wipe, and a utility creature. I think this card is so cool and interesting to use. I wish I had a Teamer deck to use it in, but sadly, I don't right now. I love deal making in Commander. It's super great and super fun. The last tip I have though is be wary when making deals with new players. You don't want anyone to feel like they've been manipulated or tricked. And it means they'll never take your deals in the future if they feel like that's what you're doing. Be upfront about your deals and do your best to abide by them. If you break a deal once, it takes a very long time to build that trust back up. So that's my guide to making deals in Commander. What did you think? Do you find yourself making deals a lot? Do you use any of these cards that I mentioned? If not, are you going to try them out? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support me, consider subscribing and liking the video. Also, if you want to support me further, check out the Patreon as well. You could even be in the credits, like my tier 3 patrons here.